So I'd like to do just a couple more exercises here that are related to some of the homework. In exercise 6, we want to evaluate sine negative pi over 3 cosine 9 pi over 4. So just notice that this is like a multiplication problem of two different trig function values. So you have to evaluate each separately, then multiply the results. Then multiply the results. So let's treat these as two separate, kind of like two separate problems to get started. Just look at sine of negative pi over 3. So it's negative pi over 3, not too hard to draw in standard position. It's in quadrant 4. And its reference angle is positive pi over 3. So sine of negative pi over 3 is related to sine pi over 3 in quadrant 4. X is positive, y is negative. So sine is negative because of the quadrant, right? And so we need the sine of pi over 3 is square root of 3 over 2. So I get negative square root of 3 over 2. There's my value of sine of negative pi over 3. Now let's think about 9 pi over 4. So multiples of pi over 4 are like multiples of 45 degrees. So 9 pi over 4, I can just go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. There's 9 pi over 4. It actually has the same terminal side as pi over 4 is 45 degrees. And the reference angle is pi over 4, because I went pi over 4 beyond one full circle. Quadrant is quadrant 1. So the in quadrant 1, both sine and cosines are positive, right? So let's see, we need cosine of 9 pi over 4. It's related to cosine of the reference angle, which is pi over 4. And because we're in quadrant 1, it's positive. Cosine of pi over 4 is square root of 2 over 2, so we get square root of 2 over 2. All right, so for our final answer here, we're going to take sine of negative pi over 3 times cosine of 9 pi over 4. Now all we got to do is multiply these two results together. Negative square root of 3 over 2 times square root of 2 over 2 is negative. I can multiply the square roots. Negative square root of 6 over 2 times 2 is 4. And there's my value for exercise 6. Negative square root of 6 over 4. All right, exercise 7, one more of this type now. And actually, this is sort of a different twist on things. Evaluate sine of 3 pi over 5 and cosine of 3 pi over 5. Now, just a little background here. A lot of these exercises we've been doing are kind of artificial because they rely on special angles. So in this one, the special angles are not involved here. The special angles are like 30, 45, 60 degrees, or in radians, pi over 6, pi over 4, pi over 3. Pi over 5 is not a special angle. So if we end up with an angle that's not one of these angles we've memorized, in fact, we could convert to degrees here, and let's see, pi over 5 in degrees turns out to be 180 over 5. 180 over 5 is at 30, I think 36 degrees actually. So 3 pi over 5 would be 3 times 36 degrees. 3 pi over 5 is going to be, I think 108 degrees. But the point here is we must use a calculator. That's the only way that we have to give values in this situation. So we can find a reference angle, we can determine the quadrant, we can do all that kind of work. In fact, let's just try to draw a picture. But the reference angle is no help. 3 pi over 5. 5 pi over 5 is like 180, right? So 5 pi over 5 is pi. So 3 pi over 5, I think you can kind of see it's more than halfway to pi. So past 90 degrees. In fact, I already calculated the degree measure. And we can see the reference angle would take us to 5 pi over 5. So 2 pi over 5 is the reference angle. But this is no help. Because we don't know any values of that reference angle, 2 pi over 5. So again, we must use a calculator. I'm not going to try to fool you on these, but I just wanted to do at least one where you saw if we're not getting our special angles, we have no way out of this other than to use a calculator. And so I'm just going to use a calculator. And I will tell you when you must use a calculator. I'll tell you when you are forbidden from using a calculator. It won't have to be anything tricky about that. And I'm pulling out my cheapo calculator here, and now we've been in degree mode for a lot of other problems. This is a radian measure, so I have to learn how to change my calculator to radian mode, and I have to enter 3 times pi divided by 5. What you're seeing here is like the decimal form of 3 pi over 5 right now. And my calculator's in radian mode, so I can just hit sign. And I see a decimal appears. This is about 0.95105. So if I round off to 4 places, it's 0.11. That's all I can do. All I can do is push calculator buttons to get this value. Cosine of 3 pi over 5 is the same thing. And so I'm going to do 3 times pi divided by 5 again, and hit cosine, and there's my cosine value. So notice the calculator, you don't have to tell it the quadrant. It just knows sine is positive, cosine is negative. Negative 0.3090. And sure enough, we know we're in quadrant 2, so we expected to get a positive sine value, because y's are positive there, and a negative cosine value, and we did. And that's that for this portion.